Start. Yes, got it. Okay, hello everybody. I'm Maria Elisa Christie. I'm Director of Women and Gender in International Development at CRED, the Center for International Research, Education, and Development. I think somebody has to mute their Zoom, probably one of our computers. Okay, and yeah, she's going to be checking this. So thank you, everybody, for coming in person and all the people we have on Zoom as well. So this is a hybrid session. We just started coming back into the library this semester, but we don't want to lose our international and national followers on Zoom. So as of this morning, we had 93 people registered for today's event. So in addition to many diverse folks in the United States, we had people join us from 5 countries, including Bangladesh, Canada, Kenya, the Netherlands, and Pakistan. So welcome to everybody. So please note our event will be recorded. So if you do not, so by staying on Zoom, you're consenting to being recorded. You can just not have your image showing if you don't want to have your image recorded. So the full update and the full information on this event is on our website, and Lindy is going to put that information on there. That's at the CRED website, for you can just Google Women and Gender and Development on VT. And before I introduce our illustrious speaker, I want to read a short version of our land and labor recognition, but encourage you to look at the Inclusive VT webpage for a longer, more detailed version. So Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tutaló-Monacan people's homeland, and we recognize their continued relationship with their lands and waterways. And we further acknowledge that the Morrill Land Grant College Act in 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands in California and other areas in the West. We also recognize that enslaved Black people generated revenue and resources used to establish Virginia Tech and were prohibited from attending until 1953. Through Inclusive VT, the institutional and individual commitment to ut prosum that I may serve, in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence, we commit to advancing a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. So that's some brief housekeeping notes. The discussion will last approximately 45 minutes. Our speaker's presentation will be about 25 minutes, followed by 20 minutes question, answer, and discussion. So all of the participants joining via Zoom will be muted to enable the speaker to present without interruption. After Jessica's presentation, people can raise their hands here in person, and we have 2 microphones that we'll send around so that everybody can hear, including those on Zoom. And in Zoom, you can also raise your hand through your virtual button, but you can also, throughout, those of you on Zoom, you can put your questions into the chat, and we track those, and we can read those questions at the end of the presentation. So in order for our discussion to be as rich as it can be, we need everybody to be as respectful as possible and treat all participants with kindness and consideration without discriminatory behavior. So again, the webinar is being recorded, and you will have access to it via our website, and it will also be permanently archived on VT Works in the library. So in advance, I hate to say this, but when we send you a link to a survey, please take 1 minute to respond to it. It's really important to us. Tweet us by tagging at WGT_VT. Okay. Now to introduce our speaker, what you're really here for. Okay. Jessica Spence is an experienced researcher in gender-based agriculture issues and international agricultural education. She was most recently a program coordinator at the Borlaug Institute for International Agriculture for the USDA FAS-funded International Agricultural Education Fellowship Program, where she worked and lived in Ghana, overseeing and managing the program aimed at increasing school-based agricultural education in conjunction with 4-H Ghana. She's currently a doctoral student here at Virginia Tech in the Department of Agricultural Leadership and Community Education. Her research focuses on gender-based agriculture issues and school-based agriculture education within international development. Her master's thesis studied the experience of female smallholder farmers in northern Uganda through the photovoice methodology. And she's focused on conducting research aimed at the empowerment of women farmers across the developing world. Her title, today is Speaking for Themselves, the importance of enabling Ugandan women to share their story through photography and community dialogue. So please welcome Jessica Spence, and please stand here for the Zoom viewers.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to everyone on Zoom and everyone that's here in person. I'm really excited to share this research with you and very thankful that Dr. Christie asked me to speak in this series. This was my master's thesis research at Texas A&M University. So it's been a few years since I did it. But it's still a very important piece of work for me and has very much affected my trajectory as a researcher and the things that I care about in this world. So this is Speaking for Themselves, the importance of enabling Ugandan women to share their story through photography and community dialogue. And before I really get into it, I want to introduce y'all to Ruby. This is a pseudonym, as are all the names in the rest of the study, but Ruby is nonetheless a very real, incredible, sassy, powerful woman living in the Apache region and northern Uganda. She farms sunflowers, if you couldn't tell, but she also farms a myriad of other crops and cares for many animals that she uses to feed her family. And something really incredible about Ruby is when I asked her how many kids she said she had 16 dependents. So that includes her kids, some of her family members' kids that she cares for, and some orphans that she's taken in. Not all of my participants have 16 dependents, that's quite a bit, but they all have a large family and a lot of people that they care for. So I just kind of wanted to paint a picture about Ruby and all of her responsibilities before we kind of got into this. So keep her in mind as we work through this. So as we know, we got to eat to survive. Agriculture is globally important. I don't think you can argue with me on that one. But women are a huge part of producing agriculture globally, especially when it comes to communities like Uganda or countries like Uganda that depend heavily on subsistence and smallholder farming. Unfortunately, women's issues that are globally seen can intensify in developing countries, including issues of land ownership, monetary control, lack of resources, and policy that tends to work against them. We also know that there's a gender-based lack of research and extension efforts made towards women in these types of communities. So a little bit about Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. Let me quickly make this small so everyone can see. When it does this. Okay. So Uganda is a beautiful tropical country in Eastern Africa. And it was a British colony from the late 1800s all the way to the mid 1900s, and is very diverse with 19 ethnic groups. But it's also important to note that agriculture is very important to Uganda and its economy and its livelihood and society. It's often said, I've heard it many times whilst in the country, that agriculture is the backbone of Uganda. And that's also even cited in literature. So quite important to the country. And in Uganda, like I described, these global issues, those are unfortunately still existing in Uganda. And we also know that women in Uganda tend to produce more food, especially in smallholder farming type situations, produce more food than their male counterparts, and are also in charge of majority family responsibility, child rearing, and home care, and things of that nature. So to touch a bit on my theoretical framework that guided this study and is quite intertwined with the method that we'll talk about in a second, I utilized Southern feminist theory. That is not to be confused with the South we have here in America, but the global South. And it denotes traditional Western feminist thinking as it recognizes that women in colonized or previously colonized nations have their own separate issues that are different than those of women in Western countries. And so the purpose why I did this was to better explain and understand the issues Ugandan women agricultural producers face, with the aims being to define and understand those issues, but also to make recommendations for change in policy. That's a large tenet of photovoice. So to get to photovoice, this thing that I keep talking about, I have a couple slides on this method because I want to dig into this a little bit more than I probably even did in my master's presentation, because it's not really about the method, but I love this method. It's, I think, very appropriate for this population and populations like it. And it's rooted in feminist theory and Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. thinkings and is been developed by Wang and Burris in the late 1980s to 1990s to be specifically appropriate for marginalized populations and those typically who don't have a voice, to give a voice to the voiceless is what they say. And it's also a form of participatory action research, which I had never heard that term before this study, but that's become increasingly important to me, to have participants in research actively involved in telling their story and working with the researcher to make sure it's the story that they want to be told and generating that data rather than just simply my observations. If I had gone in and taken these photos, they would have looked very differently than what the participants produced. So getting to that, very literally, photovoice was me giving 10 cameras to women in 2 different villages, 5 in each, and asked them to take photos of their lives. And we later talked about that in focus groups. So they were digital cameras, point and shoot, and we'll get to that a little bit in the later in this presentation. But like I said, photovoice really is rooted in a feminist theory with generating the study by and with participants and mirroring feminist inquiry into women's realities that is carried out by and with women instead of on them, in an empowering way that honors the intelligence of the women, the participants in this study, with the goal of valuing their knowledge and experience. So like I said, I worked with 10 wonderful women in 2 different villages. I spent quite a bit of time there, just in those communities, getting to know them. And after a church service one day, there was a community gathering where I had gained permission from the community leader to ask the women in his village if I could invite them to be a part of this study. I want to definitely note and highlight the one and only Agnes Obote, who was my translator who spoke Luo and Lengo, and I could not have completed the study without her. She is a general coordinator for the NGO called Field of Hope that operates in Lira, Uganda. And she has been working in these communities for over 10 years. So they know her very well. There's a lot of trust there. And I can guarantee you I would have absolutely been a stranger in these communities if I'd walked into them without her. So she is a huge part of my ability to have done this at all. And anytime I go to Uganda, she says I'm her she's my Uganda mama. So I love her deeply. Back to this study, I wanted to also note that something particular about Northern Uganda, it's, like I said, a very diverse country in its people, but also different histories of the regions in the country, and that it has specifically been stunted, especially agriculturally, by the impact of the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army, in the late 1980s to early 2000s. That was very tragic and kept people out of their homes and livelihoods and out of the farms, and stunted a lot of agricultural knowledge passed down to generations. So that is something specific about this region that has impacted agriculture. And so the sample for this study was, like I said, 10 women, and they were all subsistence farmers in some capacity, growing very similar crops, from soybeans, cowpeas, which are black beans, sunflowers. Most of them had chickens or a couple of pigs, and a couple of them had ox, as you will see. And like I kind of explained, I got a little ahead of myself. I worked with those communities and identified opinion leaders to gain permission to enter those communities and ask for participants. And luckily I had people that agreed to my crazy ideas. And I distributed 5 cameras to 5 different women. I taught them how to use them. Most of these women have smartphones or phones in some capacity and have taken many pictures in their lives. But I believe it was all of their first time using a point and shoot camera. Those are, I feel like, a thing of the past at this point, but very useful for this study. And they were digital, and I used an SD card for the photos. A lot of times photovoice uses film, but that was not really possible where I was. So they had 10 days, and I asked them just simply to take pictures of their lives as farmers, and did very little to influence like any kind of photography style or this is how you take a photo, or what should be in a photo, the subject of a photo. Any kind of advice like that was not given, as is suggested by Wang and Burris, to not influence whatever creative possibilities that could come from the participants' minds themselves. So before we get into the results of this study, I want to talk about a pretty cool thing that happened. When I got back after 10 days to see the photos these women had taken, they took over 800 collectively, and a large portion of them were self-portraits. And they didn't have a selfie stick. They didn't have a tripod to set something up on. And so I don't want to get into like photography ethics and who takes a photo and who owns it and all that stuff. They took their self-portraits. They asked someone to take a picture of them, and they were in the photo that they composed and said, hey, take a picture of me with this situation, which you'll see in a second. But I was not expecting that. Whenever I sat down with them and saw that, I thought, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong. Did they take this photo or did they not? And I had to let those feelings go, and just that's what they all decided to do. And I think it's really cool that that happened in 2 separate villages. They were 2 hours apart from each other by car, and very likely no communication between the two to talk about that was the plan. So that was really cool. So the following photos in the rest of this section of the results section are taken by the women in the study. The study also resulted in 2 major themes described by 7 different sub-themes, and that's what we're about to dig into. So the first major theme that the women shared with me as they shared their photos came in the form of what I call agronomic knowledge and competencies, and that's described by the sub-themes varied agricultural practices, physical skills and fatigue, and technical challenges. So starting off with varied agricultural practices, as is shown here, these women know what they're doing. They know how to manage their crops. They're very knowledgeable and work very hard to grow their crops for their families. But they really wanted to display that knowledge to me, and showing me all the different techniques that they used. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, they picked 1 to 2 photos, or I asked for them to pick 1 to 2 photos a piece out of the 800, or out of their own portions, but we went through all of them. They really wanted to explain every single photo to me, which was incredible. So, and a great experience. But they really wanted to show me all of the practices that they knew, and they were very competent agricultural producers. Another unfortunate but realistic and just rooted in the reality of their lives theme was that of physical fatigue. Most of these women are farming by hand hoe, and if they're lucky, they have an ox plow and they can share that, but that's not always available. And they wanted to show me how they farm using hand hoe, but also talked about how tired they were and how laborious this is, not only in planting and tilling the soil, but also in harvest. And in that in-between time, they physically talked about chasing crows away and keeping their crops safe with their physical bodies. So an intensely laborious job. They also talked about technical challenges, coming from anything from pests to showing me yellowed leaves and holes in leaves eaten away by pests, as well as the issues with germination and the expense that comes from buying seeds over and over again, and seeds being sold to them that are faulty and having to buy more. And that's really costly and an unfortunate part of what they have to deal with. Coming to the next larger theme described by quite a few sub-themes is abstract social constructs. And this is described by the sub-themes: patriarchal society, women assuming the majority responsibility, financial and physical abuse, independence, lack of help, and visualization of self-actualization. So starting off, themes of a patriarchal society came through in these discussions. Another note, there were no men present during the time of the focus group, so in hopes that would be like a free space to talk about anything that might be controversial if that was not the case. So they talked about being responsible for the majority of the cultivation of their crops, that they were out there all day working, and that their male counterparts may come help them in the morning, but often leave, and they are left to work in the field, and then also that they come home and are in charge of food, household care, and education of their children. That kind of comes into the women assuming the majority responsibility when it came to cooking water, firewood, everything they had to do at home, and including the agricultural process, thrashing, harvesting, they said is all the work of the woman, and that they're also responsible for their children, and that children also come to them in terms of school funds and anything like that. They come to their mother for funds going to school, clothes, and anything like that. Unfortunately, they talked about financial abuse at the threat of physical abuse, and that both of those things are come together. They do all of this work, and when it's time to go to the market and exchange goods for money, that money then goes into the hands of their male counterparts, and that they do not retain control of those funds, yet have this like problem where the children still are asking them rather than their father for funds for school and things like that when they are not in control of that. And when any pushback or wanting to retain those funds is asked for, that's met often with physical violence. Another theme that was very clear through their words and photos was independence. Like I described, they do a lot of this work with some help, but a lot of it by themselves. There is obviously community and people are helping each other, but they all have their own farms that they have to take care of and their own kids and people depending on them, but are extremely independent through that work, and feel very capable of themselves. One of the participants said she specifically took photos of herself to show me that she does all of this work by herself. Another theme that I really wasn't expecting, but really came up quite a bit, was just they felt they had a lack of help and how draining it is to feel like you don't have help, and that affected their happiness. This theme kind of came through our discussion about the self-portraits and what those meant. When I saw those and asked them why they took them, it was part of their self-actualization as being a farmer, being a woman farmer. So they wanted to show that their struggles as women farmers by and showing that by photographing themselves, and took photos of themselves to show their challenges as women farmers. Sorry to throw numbers at you in the middle of a qualitative study, but I just wanted to put this in here to kind of talk about those self-portraits for a minute, as they're kind of especially intertwined in this previous theme and this next theme we're going to talk about. And that is just, like I said, over 800 photos taken, but a large percentage of them from almost every participant, and large is relative, but I think a significant portion of them being self-portraits, which I thought was just an incredible phenomenon. And lastly, we saw pride and self-identification. So not only am I a farmer, but I'm very proud to be a farmer and proud to be a woman farmer. And they wanted to show me that women can do farming too. And I'm probably obviously an outsider, and they obviously had preconceptions of what I thought a farmer looks like in Uganda, but they wanted to really show me that women are powerful and can do farming just like a man can. So that leads me to our conclusions. My first research question was, how do Ugandan women see their role within agriculture? And I found that they see their role holistically, not only as a producer, but also responsible for their families, and that those things are quite intertwined, and that they self-identify as farmers and have a lot of pride in that role. And for the next research question, how do Ugandan women feel they face gender-based challenges within agriculture? We saw the responsibility that is their reality, that they take on more than the men in their lives, and that they're motivated to produce in the garden because of the responsibilities to feed their kids and their dependents that they care about at home. And unfortunately, that they do not retain control over their income, and that lack of help in general. When I also answering the research question, what struggles do they face within agriculture? We really see those technical issues come through as well as the gender-based ones, but that fatigue and physical tiredness, lack of help, and just general agriculture issues that was in the first major theme. And thinking about how improvements can be made, I think that they should be made, or I can conclude that they can be made thinking about these technical issues and gender issues and how we can kind of attack those together. So my recommendations are many, but I'll kind of be brief with you. I know that this was just a few women in a very niche part of the world, but their experience is not like other women in other parts of the world. So I recommend that this study is replicated with like populations in other parts of the country, of the region, and of the globe. I also know that there are many voices missing from these questions, and that's the voices of men. And so I really recommend that further research be done into men's thoughts on these topics. I also think a study, like I said, I kind of kept this separate and like in a space that was protected with knowing that men weren't around while the data was being collected, or we were talking about these things, but how would these answers change if men were in the room? I think that that would be a really important thing to look at as well. And lastly, I am very excited about this because I think it's very seldom that you maybe get to see some of your recommendations come to life, but I recommend extension specifically targeted for women, and that being a like that is meant for them. And some students at Texas A&M University back in 2020 competed in the United Nations case competition against some really like heavy competition. It's a very cool competition. You guys should check it out. But they won 3rd place in the globe. It was incredible. And they based their plan off of this recommendation for gender-based extension training in northern Uganda. And although they got 3rd place and therefore didn't get funds, which is very unfortunate, they have worked hard to produce grassroots funding and created a program called Her Mighty Hands that now works with Field of Hope, that organization that Agnes works with, to produce videos that can be disseminated in Luo and Lengo in that are extension technical agriculture training, and they're specifically working with women, a lot of them being the women in the study, which is very awesome. And so yeah, that recommendation is already coming to fruition, be it small, but it is mighty and will hopefully continue to grow. So they've already piloted it and seen results of higher yields with the women that have been working with program. So very cool. So sorry, getting back to this, there's my little tangent there. In summary, this study discovered that women farmers in Uganda face a myriad of issues that build upon one another to create a wall of seemingly impenetrable challenges, but they're resilient and proud. And if efforts were made to help promote their agriculture knowledge or support them, that those would come back tenfold because of the responsibility that they feel towards their family and the pride they feel as farmers. And lastly, I want to come back to that statement that agriculture is the backbone of Uganda. It's the backbone of the country. I really feel like it's evident through this study that women are the muscle behind that backbone, and that they should be worked to be empowered and unified. Thank you all for being here and listening to me talk about this thing for quite some time. And a special thank you to the women of Dokolo and Apache for letting me take some of their time and hear their stories. Thank you to Field of Hope and Agnes. And thank you to the Center for Conflict and Development at Texas A&M who funded the cameras for this study. Thanks. I went over time a little bit. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Let's see. I'm not sure if I should unmute. I think I should unmute for people. No, see, I can't unmute.
No, I think if they unmute, they can talk.
Here, I'm going to talk on this thing. So just we're going to take turns having questions from in here, and I think you can stand up here and call them, and then I'll read one from the Zoom that's coming on the chat. Okay? So I'm going to start with one from the chat, just because they're not here. So I'll give them a little bit presence here. So Rebecca Gianotti, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, says, "Hi Jessica, just wondering, how did you decide where in Uganda to work, connecting with these particular communities?"
A very good question. The reality of that is Field of Hope was my in these communities, specifically Agnes. And these are, they work with more communities than just these two, but these were what was accessible to me. But also the reason why Field of Hope is in Northern Uganda is because of those that, compared to other regions of the country, is that agricultural development stunting as a result of the LRA. So that's why they're there to begin with. That's why that region has specific issues and that's a little different than other parts of the country in terms of agricultural development, which is compounding on why I was there. But to be honest, that was the access I had. So that is a part of why I was there. Anybody? was fascinated.
I was fascinated that the women described every photograph to you,
Yes.
and I assume you have notes on that. Do you have plans for, that's a rich trove of data. I mean, and the photographs themselves. Do you see doing more with this project?
All good questions. Thankfully, I'm happy to be an ICTOS fellow at Virginia Tech, where I've got a lot of free time to delve back into this research and specifically work on research. But yes, that was incredible. That was, again, I'm like a new baby researcher, and I'm sitting down trying to follow it by the book on like, you sit down, you ask them for 1 to 2 photographs, and that's what you talk about. But they were like, they were going to talk about all the photographs that they took, and they went through every single one. So yes, a lot of data. I would really like to look at the journey of visual literacy as the photos. I can just like tell by looking at them that they got the hang of using the camera and telling more of a story as the photos progress. And I think that's really cool. I think just by my knowledge of the data, the photos that they selected were ones they took later in those 10 days. And so I think that kind of lends itself to that their comfortableness with the camera and kind of what that says too, in conjunction with those things they talked about. Yeah, very good question.
I don't know if this mic is working, but I'm gonna just pretend it is. So I'm gonna read a question from a person on Zoom. This is Sidra Khalid. Were the themes also developed with the women, or did you come up with them yourself? How involved were women in the analysis process?
Good question. I was back in the United States whenever I was finally analyzing the data. And so no, the themes were developed by myself, but I definitely think that that would be a great modification of photovoice to continue working with participants and develop those themes together. That's another way to take the method that definitely would be very innovative. And I think also important and really keeping with that, the whole point of it being that participatory action. If you continue that on through analysis, I think would be really powerful. But no, that's not what I did.
I raised my hand. I had a question in there.
Yeah. So
Can I go ahead and ask?
Sure.
go ahead, Suchi.
Oh, okay, Jessica, that was really, really interesting. Thank you. I had a question about, and I put it in the chat, is, I not having control over their income. Are there any options? I mean, I know that Seva, for example, in India has set up insurance plans and sort of banking where poor women, self-employed women can have some control over their income, which would empower them. So was there any such thought, initiative, comments that the women you spoke with made?
Excellent question. Yes and no. I can't speak in terms of more formal banking. I really lack the knowledge on that subject. However, Field of Hope has been working there for that many years with a VSLA, Village Savings and Loan Association.
Okay.
I believe is the correct acronym with those communities. The way it has gone, I've been working with that organization for 4 or 5 years at this point. So I have a little bit of knowledge about some different feedback on that is that it starts with women, but in almost every instance, as they grow the program and invite more people in every community, they start with women, especially in leadership positions like treasurer, but often when men want to be a part of it and they come into the organization, they often start to take over and be president or treasurer because with the justification that they have more literacy than most of the women and or education. And so I should be treasurer because I've been to school longer, etc. So yes, that is a possibility. And those VSLAs have been successful. Just me thinking that Field of Hope's done a good job there, but that is an issue that arises in most of those programs as well.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Get one more in the room and then,
Okay.
I don't know. Oh, here. Here, gotta turn the button. Push the button. It turns green, but it doesn't sound any.
Okay. I was wondering 2 things. One, why was it important not to give them not to let them use just their regular smartphones and use the point and click cameras instead? And then the other one is, you were talking about being inspired by Southern feminist theory and post-colonial theory. And I don't know what these women talked about in terms of their own theorizing about their situation, if they were thinking about colonial draining of resources from the land, and also how they felt that their collectivist impulse to protect their families was a feminist impulse. So I'm inviting you to speak a bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I chose to bring in those point and shoots, because data can be expensive. Also, data can be the reception in those regions can be questionable. So in terms of making sure that was possible, also those phones are typically shared within a family and quite often in control of the husband. And so assuming that they would have that for 10 days and have the freedom to take those photos was not something I wouldn't want to make that assumption. So that's why I brought them. I also assumed that some of them may not have phones. And so I didn't want to rely on that. And then that was a uniform way of, they use SD cards. I could put that in my computer. Also just like technically made sense as far as that was concerned. As far as comments about colonialism and anything of that nature, that did not come up as part of the themes. Nor did I, what was this latter part about their theorizing?
Family formation.
Not as in terms of colonialism, no.
But separately from that, because you kept pointing back to family members as being their inspiration. So I'm wondering if they saw that though in a very strong light, as opposed to like, as a form of feminism is what I'm asking.
Absolutely, yes. And that they were, I think, not necessarily heads of household, but were the, like, again, muscle behind that. And even though they're not in charge of the money, the kids come to them for school and things like that. And for those things, like they're the one you get permission from, even though they may not have the monetary control. So I definitely think so.
Okay, I'm going to read one from the chat. This is from, and again, I'm just going to try to pronounce it right, but sorry if I don't. Marie-Lee Champeau says, "Hi, Jessica, wonderful presentation. I'm curious to know if the mothers can bring their children with them while they tend to their agricultural activities, like for instance, if they're breastfeeding or even pregnant. And I'm also wondering if these traditional ways of attending to plants and having women work is also a demonstration in itself of tradition. And as you were explaining, independence and strength."
Yes, great question. Hi, Mary-Lise, thanks for coming. Absolutely, that you will see babies tied to mothers' backs while they are weeding or tending to their garden. I went back to go visit this past summer, and one of the participants was heavily pregnant and still out working. So absolutely. As far as traditional agriculture, to be honest, I didn't see a lot of, I saw a lot of manual labor, but not necessarily what I would think of as traditional agriculture. A lot of impact of like Green Revolution type, treated seeds, things like that. So I don't necessarily know if that's something that I saw, but I definitely think that is something to look further into.
Can I just follow on from that question? I was curious, is the knowledge of that the women are putting into their farming, is that something they train or they teach their daughters about? I mean, is this something that they pass down generations?
Yes, and that is why the impact of the LRA, where people were kind of kept in kind of camps, essentially, away from their home villages for 20 years, kind of eliminated that ability to pass down knowledge generationally. But yes, as I think as soon as a daughter is old enough, and children are old enough to begin working in the garden, they are helping, absolutely. And so that is how they get that knowledge is passed down to them.
Okay, thank you.
I have several more on Zoom, but
Okay.
please.
Yeah, great presentation. Thanks, Jessica. I noticed when you were presenting the concept of photo voice that you said, as is said, give voice to the voiceless, and you put it in air quotes, perhaps hinting at what others have said, that no one is truly voiceless. It's just that there are conditions that make people's voices less heard or less amplified. And I like that you used enabling in the title as well, because that's, I think, what photovoice does. But it makes me curious about, so clearly there were these feminist themes of self-identity and power. I'm wondering, did the women also reflect on this exercise as, so what were their existing ways of speaking and being heard about their livelihood activities? And then how did getting to participate in this feel different, and sort of, was it a huge rupture, or were they like, oh no, we always speak up anyway, this is just a new version of doing it?
Great question. They reflected positively about photovoice and just it being like a fun thing to do, and they enjoyed also speaking with each other. I think the outspokenness was very individualized. Like I said, Ruby in the beginning, I have no doubt she's voiced her opinion at some point. But in general, I think that it's like I kind of talked about with the physical control met with or financial control met with physical violence. That opposition is often met with physical violence or like that male control. So in terms of, I think their usual ways of communicating about it, I definitely think it's talked about amongst women commonly. Agnes was very aware of all of these things and helped definitely guide a lot of that as far as helping me think through research or the interview questions and things like that that were appropriate. So they talked to her about it, and especially because she's a woman but has been working there for so long. But I think that trust has definitely lent that. But I'm positive just constant communal conversation is being had about these things, but prior and after to me being there.
Okay, I'm going to read, there's a couple of people that haven't asked questions yet, so I'm going to jump to them, though we have several others. So this one is from Caleb Umberger. Hello, were the participants involved in deciding what the recommendations should be for the study?
Yes, I did ask them what they would like, and they asked for more training on agricultural technical issues. So yes, in part, but also as I developed and analyzed, a lot of the recommendations were based on myself as well. But again, as to someone's comments about involving participants in the analysis as well, I think that that would be a great modification of photovoice as well, and continue that member checking and coming back to those participants. Absolutely, as far as the development of recommendations. Anybody else?
I actually have a follow on my earlier question. So I'm thinking of hearing all of these
stories about the photographs, were those done one-on-one or were they in the group? So I guess a shorter question is, did the women talk to one another about why they took the photos they did and what those photos meant?
I did not ask them if they spoke about the study outside. That was a great question. I wish I would have asked that. Especially when it came to I was not expecting and I should have maybe expected the communal nature of how they took the photos and asking each other to take them. I think we can infer that they were discussing it if they were asking someone to take a photo of them in a certain way. But I didn't specifically ask them about dialogue that they had about the photo taking while they were independent. Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, both groups, how I collected the discussion of the photos was in a focus group form, but they were 5 and 5 in each village. I visited, I believe, Dokolo first and Apache next on 2 different days, and then 10 days later it was Dokolo and Apache, so they each had an equal amount of time. It was like same time, same place, same time of day, and it was all of them together in a focus group for individual answering questions. There was a lot of consensus. When one person would say one thing, I would hear almost all of them, nod or go and in agreement together. So that kind of confirming that was all of them as well. And then there was dialogue between them. So which is why I think focus groups are, I don't want to say better, but really behoove the method of photovoice in terms of that community dialogue being part of it. I definitely would have not gotten the same data if I had done individual interviews. I fear that questions would maybe be asked very directly, and conversation may not have gotten past that due to the language barrier, but because Agnes was there, they could talk freely in Luo or Lingo, and then Agnes could translate what they were saying. And so that freedom to go past the question and also talk to each other, and a lot of data being generated from that, and also the confirmability of one person saying something and hearing four other women go, oh, that happens to me too, or I have the same problem, and also this adds to the strength of whatever part of the theme that was.
Okay, we got some more good questions in here. So Micah Dado says, Micah, okay, I
No,
wasn't
sorry.
sure. No,
Hi,
that's good.
Micah.
So because you kept the SD cards, were the women able to access their own photos at all, such as keeping hard copies of them?
I am actually, good question, great question, Micah. I am planning to bring hard copies of their photos to them this summer, but they did not keep the cameras. I donated that to Field of Hope. Agnes advised that specifically for like jealousy issues and things like that. I like thought about that quite a bit, because you want to, you know, but that was kept very upfront. If you're participating, this is not something that would be kept, but Agnes did not recommend that they keep them. So I do have the SD cards and unfortunately the photos, but I will be bringing them their physical printed photos this summer when I go. So yes, great question, Micah. And Micah is one of the ones that's directly involved with Her Mighty Hands and in the UN case competition. So thanks for being here, Micah.
Okay, if there's not a question in the room, I'm going to go back to Mary Lee. Lastly, what is the quote traditional role of the men there? Asking this because you said women were doing so much of the work and most of it.
Yes, that's why a big part of the reason I would love this study to continue on to answer that question. I can only have observed and didn't ask those questions necessarily directly. There, like I said, is some help in the garden. I would imagine being at the market, but to be honest, I saw less work as far as the gender load was concerned. So answering that question would be definitely a good one to really dig into what is done when they leave the farm and someone is still working back at the farm.
I'm just wondering if that would be the parallel.
You know, if alcoholism is a problem. Sorry. Yes. Again, I really can't speak to that. I don't want to like leap and make any assumptions. I do think drinking is pretty taboo, at least in the region that I was in. And so if that is a problem, it was not talked about because it's just not, it was taboo. I attended a wedding and I saw that the groom was drinking and everyone in my car was kind of a little bit aghast at that. So that's why I imagine I maybe didn't hear about that. I can't, good question. I would wonder if that's a problem as well, but I can't speak to that.
Okay, here's another one from Zoom. This is Brendel Wolf. Hello, did any of the following come up? Did any of the women express any feelings about harnessing their collective influence in the farming sector for system changes in any way? Did they see their role as having influence prior or after this project?
No, that did not come up, but I would love to follow up as far as thinking about this as like a systematic change in their involvement with that, as far as moving forward for any kind of like gender empowering type of support or anything like that. So good question, but no, that did not really come up in this study.
Okay, so I'm in person, although I also put it in the chat in my little Google Doc. So, okay, but I waited till the end because of course I did mine even before you started speaking. And it's because I'm so interested in qualitative methods and your use of photo voice. And I have experienced, issues around that. So here's my question, the way I wrote it out. With most research in agriculture being quantitative, what obstacles have you confronted in academia with the use of photo voice, and how have you overcome them or addressed them?
Yes. Great question. I definitely think especially in my position between this master's and this PhD, definitely felt that as far as working with funding sources and things like that, reporting being numbers is preferred than words, even though I love the words. Honestly, as far as this method, where I was at A&M, it was very highly received, and there were I guess problems there. I guess I didn't feel them. There was a faculty member on my committee that has done them before, so I don't necessarily think it was anything new. I think a lot of work in agriculture or in international agriculture is quantitative, but I also definitely see a wave and a shift towards the value of qualitative methods. And so I think maybe it still happens, you know, you like hear different attitudes about things. But I think I've heard less of that. Hopefully the wave is moving and people are appreciating qualitative methods a little bit more. So.
Can I add just a word? This Dr. Shannon Bell in the sociology department, who did her first book working in Appalachia and Appalachian women's activism against big coal. And she used the photo story method. So her book is Our Roots Run Deep as Ironweed, 2013. And she talks about her use of the photo story, where again, women photographed aspects of their lives. Shannon Bell, that's her name, and she's at Virginia Tech. And
I have her book downloaded. I know the chapter you're talking about. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
I had just one other question, because what were the sources of income for the men?
I believe the farm, to the best of my ability. There may be some other small businesses, but
It is also the farm.
the household was subsistence farming,
Okay.
both in generating their food and also their income.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the last one that I have from the chat was from Rebecca Gianotti, and you somewhat addressed it earlier, but there might be a little bit more. So she asked, I'm curious to know if these recommendations were developed with the participants or if they came out of your own reflections afterwards. In the focus groups, did the women themselves propose recommendations for what they want to see moving forward?
Yeah, so they specifically asked for like technical training, but that was a question in the interview, not after analysis. So as far as that version of recommendations, like in the scientific or in the research process, no, they unfortunately were not a part of that. But thinking ahead to future research, I think that's something I would love to implement.
Okay, there's actually a brand new one in Zoom from a new person we haven't heard from, Kelly Del Signori. Okay, hi Jessica. Thanks for your presentation. Can you speak more about extension in this area of Uganda? Since most trainings are geared towards men, do you know if they share any information with the women? Do the women learn their agricultural technical skills from informal ways of learning? Thanks.
Yes, so I traditionally aimed at men, and I think that information gets disseminated through to women, but then, you know, you're getting secondhand information that's not necessarily from an expert, and so that poses problems. Was any information withheld or just translated or given an example, especially if things are done practically and visually and the woman's not attending, then she's not getting that critical aspect of the extension training. So that's a major issue.
Yes, if a person is interested in learning more how to do photo voice, recommendation of a source.
Wang and Burris, read it
Wang and
all.
Burris.
But
Okay.
I definitely think exploring more recent and just like I said, like this, I've seen photo voice modified in many ways from the original kind of seminal pieces of it. And so I think keeping up through qualitative journals of just current applications of it, be it outside of your field, those modifications could still be very powerful in whatever context you're using them in. So read up on your Wang and Burris, but also just explore outside of your field how the method's been used newly and with innovation. I saw one not too long ago where the researcher did a photo voice and then also at the end asked the participants to photograph how the researcher in terms of how they made the participants feel, which again, just a different people are constantly exploring with the method. So don't count those new things out for sure.
Jessica, I think there's also the Journal of Visual Anthropology, if you're familiar with it. And again, I have not seen it in a while, but there might be, you know, if it's current, it might have resources for you.
Okay, great suggestion. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
There's a new one here from Rebecca, and I'm just gonna wait for you all to speak up, sorry, because you're behind me, I can't see. So Rebecca asked, in this part of Uganda, had these communities had other researchers come through before? And if so, was this method of photo voice new to them? What did they think of a study that used their perspectives in this way?
Like I said, they reflected positively on the method itself and getting to work with the cameras and talk about their stories. As far as anyone else having previously employed that method or specifically inquiring into this, I'm very much unaware of that. So I'm not going to say that that was the first time. It may not be, but I did not hear of that. So no. Oh yeah, there's
Well, thank you for the presentation. I did miss some of it in the beginning, but I've engaged in photo voice methodology in the past, and I was wondering, did you have any stories about camera mishaps or cameras being lost in the field?
great question. That was definitely a fear. I also had the fear of like them being stolen or harm being done to the women in order to like steal one. Thankfully, Agnes also guided me that she did not think that that would be a problem in that close community, that everyone kind of knew each other. Thankfully, I did not have any camera mishaps. I absolutely was in fear of that. So I just didn't, but I've absolutely seen many room for possibility of that happening. I think that my participants were very kind to like take a lot of care of the cameras that they were using. So I really appreciate the care they had for the equipment. Bola?
Okay, I'm very new to photo voice, but I really enjoyed the presentation. So I'm just wondering, you said photo voice have like an advantage of allowing the participants to determine the direction of research. So I just want to ask if there were pictures you got from, photos that you got that were not originally in your research questions. And if there was a way you were able to explain the study to them without necessarily telling them what to bring out from the book.
Yeah, great question. So the entire concept of the self-portraits or the participants returning with photos of themselves was absolutely not something I like asked for or thought would happen. So that was the photo that was returned to me that I was not expecting. A lot that I were expecting were like the issues with the plants and pictures of their kids and things like that that were a part of their lives. What was the second part of your question, Bola? I'm sorry.
How you were able to explain the study to them without telling them what to bring.
Yes. Yeah. So Agnes, my translator, was definitely very helpful with that. But I just explained that I was wanting to hear their stories as farmers and get their perspective through photos. But I was just, as I gave them the photos, very careful not to tell them like any advice on how to compose a photo or tell a story with a photo, because I really wanted that to be, and as true to the method, as much their idea in every way as possible. So I just guided them on like turning the camera on and off, zooming in and out if they wanted to zoom, and just literally clicking and taking a photo, and the ability to look back at their photos if they wanted to. So just basic camera operations was all I taught them, but I explained it to them like where I was from, why, being in school, and what I was asking them as far as research and what a thesis, and all that kind of stuff. So, and just briefly about the method itself, but didn't get too into asking them specifically for any kind of photos.
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt the in-person. I just want you to know that we have the room another half hour and she can hang out a little bit to chat. And so I'm going to ask the last question that came on the Zoom because I think they might get cut off or have to leave. So anyway, so this one was from Bernard Walumbe. It says, great presentation, Jessica. Did any of your study participants have issues with their spouses, partners by participating in this study or having a camera?
Great question. Was also very much a concern. And we did not, that I know of, that wasn't expressed to me, but I think that was due to how we went about it, and Agnes really advising me to work with the community leaders, and that was a male pastor in both communities. And when I asked for participants and explained what the study was originally, their husbands were in the room as well. So that was not necessarily a mystery. And when they volunteered, that was with their husband present. So we did not have that as an issue, but I could absolutely foresee how that was. And notably, when I had to get IRB approval, I had to get the Ugandan government's version of IRB approval, and I had to present this proposal at Gulu University in front of a panel. And one of the panelists asked me if I was going to, or it said that I should get their husband's permission on the consent forms, to which other panelists disagreed with him, and that ended up not needing to happen. But that absolutely is not something that surprised me. So yeah, that was a day. Yes.
Have to be pushing. Regarding the trainings, technical training, most of the farmers you indicate they have old age and they are doing this on a subsistence level. So what would be the training for if they are growing crops they have been growing for decades? Unless if there are elements like, say, scaling up or what, such kind of thing. But training in the things they have been doing for decades is quite unusual.
Training for things they've been doing.
Yeah, you say they express that they require training, technical skills. Technical skills to do what? Because the work they are doing is what they have been doing for.
Yes, they're obviously already very skilled, absolutely. But as far as for pest management, germination, other issues they brought up as far as technical issues, training to combat those issues they're still facing would be my recommendation. But yes, they already are extremely knowledgeable about many facets of agricultural production. Absolutely. Great question. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last one from Zoom, and then I'm going to officially close, and then you can say, but we have, gosh, we just have two more questions. One is from Dixon Otieno. Great presentation, Jessica. Did you have any concerns about the communities being over-researched? If so, how did you gain their trust to participate?
Great question, Dixon. Thank you for being here. Like I said, I didn't know of any other research that had been done in those communities. That's not to say that that hasn't been done. That was not expressed to me by the participants, nor community leaders, nor Agnes, who has been, like I said, working in them for about 10 years. So my fear of over-researching which wasn't there for those communities specifically. What was the second part of this question? Okay, I definitely think a huge amount of my trust came through working with Agnes, who they knew very well. Like I said, I don't know if I would not have been able to have done the study without that. So that is huge recognition to her and to Field of Hope.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Applause, everybody, and I'm sorry to cut this off. And like I say, those of you here can stay, but thank you all for attending, and thank you for your great work and your
Thank you guys for being here.
Presentation and your discussion. As I said, we send a short survey via the chat, and also I think via email for everybody who registered. I want to say that our next event is in about a month on April 13th with Nina Mukherjee Firstenow. You'll see information on that. It's on one of the flyers there, and it's on our website. And I'm sure that Nuvini, who I didn't say was my GA, who's a PhD candidate in education, I'm sure she's going to be sending the link to that. But I also did not say that Jessica is our Principles of Community Week speaker, as well as our Women's Month speaker. So that was very exciting to have this presentation for that. Yeah,
Thank you.
So, and then also we have food and drinks and cups. And so as you leave, please take everything that you would like, and have a wonderful day. And if you didn't sign in on your way out. So thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to everyone on Zoom as well.
And you can come up and still talk to us. Just